Winter, 1555. London breathes smoke and snow, a city wrapped in silence, waiting for judgment. The bells of Smithfield toll not for the living, but for the condemned. Each strike of metal against air falls heavy with the weight of faith, sin, and fire. And at the heart of it all, a woman kneels in prayer. Mary Tudor, Queen of England, daughter of Henry VIII, the king who broke the church to claim his will as divine. She prays not for herself, but for England's soul, a soul she believes has turned away from God. She was born of a union Rome once blessed, then cursed. Raised in exile within her own kingdom, humiliated, stripped of her title, forced to call her mother's rival queen. To Mary, faith was never abstract. It was survival. And now, with the crown finally hers, she would make her pain sacred. She would save England, even if it burned. The chapel is dark, its stone walls breathing with candlelight. The queen's lips move in silence, words dissolving into the cold air like smoke from unseen fires. Behind her, the priest steps forward, hesitant, his breath visible in the chill. "Your Majesty," he murmurs, "the heretics are ready." Mary does not answer. Her eyes remain fixed on the hearth, where the flames dance quietly. Small, obedient, pure. But in her mind, those flames are already out there, consuming the bodies of men and women who refuse the old faith. And still she whispers, "Then let their souls burn pure." In that moment, she believes she is cleansing a kingdom. To her, every heretic's scream is an offering, a sound that rises heavenward to beg forgiveness for a nation's betrayal. Yet outside the chapel walls, London trembles. Smithfield Square, once a place of trade and laughter, now stands as an altar of punishment. The air is sharp with frost and ash. Crowds gather in the snow, faces hidden beneath cloaks in fear. They watch as the pyres are lit, one by one. The flames roar alive, crackling against the winter wind, spitting sparks into the gray morning. The condemned cry out, prayers, curses, hymns, their voices twisting upward with the smoke. And somewhere in the palace not far away, the queen listens. The fire outside echoes the fire within her heart, relentless, purifying, merciless. She prayed for England's soul, the chroniclers would write, but England prayed for her to stop. To Mary, this was not cruelty, it was necessity. In the logic of her faith, salvation demanded sacrifice, and she, the queen, was its priest. The fire was her instrument, her proof of devotion. But history would remember it differently, for where she saw redemption, the world saw terror. In the reflection of the flame, Mary glimpses something she cannot bear. Not the heretics, not their burning faces, but her father, Henry VIII, laughing in a crown of fire. He had torn the church apart to satisfy his desire. She now tears her people apart to satisfy her God. And in that reflection, 2 generations of sin meet. Lust and zeal, both cloaked in divine purpose. Her hand shakes. She clutches the cross at her breast, pressing it hard enough to draw blood. The pain steadies her, for pain to Mary was holy. In every scream outside, she hears the echo of her mother's prayers, and perhaps her own. The historian looks back and sees tragedy. But within that chapel, in that frozen hour of winter, Mary Tudor saw only duty. Sacred, absolute, unyielding. The queen who burned for her faith believed herself chosen. Chosen not to rule, but to purify. To burn England clean. The fire outside rages higher, its light bleeding through the chapel windows. The bells toll again, deep, slow, unrelenting. Mary's lips move once more, whispering a prayer that sounds almost like a confession. "Lord, forgive me, or forgive them through me." And as the wind carries the screams across London, one truth becomes clear. That in the age of faith, mercy and madness often spoke the same tongue. The queen bows her head, the fire answers, and history, where forever, remembers her name in smoke. Night falls over Whitehall Palace. The torches have burned low, their light fading into a darkness thick with memory. The queen does not sleep easily anymore. Each bell that rings outside her window seems to carry a voice that calls her name not in reverence but in judgment. Mary Tudor awakens in silence. For a moment she cannot tell whether she is still dreaming. The air is heavy, dense, unmoving, as though the night itself were watching her. And there, in the half-light, she sees him, Henry VIII, the father who built an empire upon defiance, whose shadow has never left the English throne. Now that shadow stands beside her bed, not of flesh, not of spirit, but of guilt. "You call yourself my daughter?" The voice seems to come from within her own chest. "You burned what I built." Mary gasps, her breath cold against the silence. The vision shatters. The room is empty again, Only stone, candle wax, and the sound of her own heart. But the echo remains. She lights a candle, and its glow catches her reflection in the mirror, pale, trembling, half mad from sleeplessness. For a brief instant, she doesn't recognize herself. Historians would later write that Mary Tudor suffered from bouts of melancholia, what we might now call depression or religious mania. But in that century, such torment had no name. It was simply the price of faith. She gazes downward, her hand resting on her belly. It is round, full, the mark of life, the proof that God has not forsaken her. To the Queen, this child is not merely an heir. It is redemption. A son would mean continuity, divine approval, and the restoration of everything her father's sins destroyed. "You will save me," she whispers. "You will save England." Her voice trembles, somewhere between prayer and desperation. In that moment, her delusion feels real. Her body feels the movement of a child that is not there. And in her mind, the nation itself stirs with hope. But outside her chamber, whispers run through the corridors. Physicians, midwives, courtiers, all speak in low voices, careful not to be heard. They have examined the Queen. They have waited, measured, prayed. Yet no heartbeat, no life, only air. "There is no child," one of them finally admits, "only air." Science would later call it pseudocyesis, a false pregnancy born from the body's obedience to the mind's belief. In the 16th century, there was no such word. There was only mystery and shame. The Queen who burned her people for faith now burns within her own illusion. Her kingdom was barren, and so was she. The phrase would echo through the ages, cruel, simple, and true. Mary's imagined child had been her final hope to heal the wound between her and her father, between England and God. Without it, the chasm widens. In the loneliness of her chamber, the Queen's faith begins to twist. She believes her suffering is divine punishment, that God tests her through silence. To the world, she is Bloody Mary, the tyrant who burns her own people. But within her mind, she is the penitent daughter, carrying the cross her father left behind. The candles flicker. The palace walls seem to breathe. And in the rhythm of her heartbeat, she almost hears the sound of a child crying. Faint, distant, unreal. She smiles through her tears, convinced that this is proof. But outside the door, the doctors kneel in despair. The Queen is lost within her own faith, prisoner of a miracle that never was. Historians today recognize the signs, the psychosomatic power of belief, the devastating intersection between theology and biology. Mary's body responded to her hope with perfect precision. Her abdomen swelled, her breasts filled with milk, her womb prepared itself for a life that would never come. It is one of the most haunting cases of royal delusion in recorded history, where faith reshaped flesh. And yet perhaps there was a strange truth within it. For Mary Tudor did carry something inside her. Not a child, but a legacy, a lineage of fire and devotion that would define England's destiny long after her death. From that empty womb would rise a new age, the age of Elizabeth. But that night, in her chamber, none of this was yet written. The Queen clutches her rosary. The candle burns low. And somewhere in the silence between her heartbeat and her prayer, the ghost of Henry VIII laughs once more. For the blood that haunted her throne was not her enemy's. It was her own. Morning fog drifts through the courtyards of Whitehall Palace. The air is thick with the smell of rain and stone, and something colder still, departure. Spain's banners hang limp in the damp air. Servants whisper in the corridors, avoiding the Queen's gaze. Within the great hall, Mary Tudor stands at the foot of the staircase. Before her, dressed in steel and silence, is Philip of Spain, her husband, her king, and her most distant companion. This is not the image of royal love that poets once promised. It is the quiet end of a union born from politics, duty, and desperation. When Mary married Philip, she believed it was a covenant not only between two monarchs, but between heaven and earth. To her, he was the symbol of divine restoration, the foreign prince who would return England to the Catholic faith, the man through whom her barren womb might still deliver salvation. But to him, England was only a pawn, a damp, suspicious island at the edge of empire. "You said our marriage was blessed," she pleads, her voice trembling like the fog around them. "Is Spain not my home too?" Philip looks away. His eyes are polished glass, reflective, but not receptive. "My home," he says, "is where God commands me, not where ghosts cling." With that, he turns. The echo of his boots fades down the marble stairs. The Queen's hand, once clinging to his, falls slowly to her side. The great hall of Whitehall yawns around her, vast and hollow. The morning light drifts across the throne like smoke, revealing dust, not glory. In that silence, the weight of every crown she has ever worn settles upon her shoulders. Love had been her final altar. But even that, God did not let burn. To understand this moment, we must look beyond the tragedy of a woman's heart and see the machinery of empire grinding behind it. The marriage of Mary Tudor and Philip II was not born from affection. It was a treaty signed in flesh. England, isolated after years of religious upheaval, sought legitimacy through alliance. Spain, rising as the Catholic superpower of Europe, saw opportunity. But the English people did not see a savior in Philip. They saw a conqueror, a foreign monarch who might claim their land, their laws, and their souls. From the moment he arrived, London watched him with suspicion. He did not speak their language. He did not share their blood. And when he walked through the streets, the crowd bowed out of fear, not devotion. For Mary, who had spent her entire life craving love, the love of her father, the love of her God, this rejection was unbearable. Philip became both her salvation and her punishment. She loved him with the same ferocity she wielded against her enemies. And when he withdrew, she mistook his coldness for divine trial. Modern historians see in this union the anatomy of a psychological wound. Mary's faith demanded surrender, and so she surrendered completely. Philip's politics demanded distance, and so he withdrew without hesitation. Between them lay a void that neither crown nor creed could fill. When Philip finally left England for Spain, the Queen refused to accept it as farewell. She wrote to him again and again, letters filled with devotion, fear, and guilt. Each began with the words, "To my most dear Lord and husband, whom God bless above all men," and each went unanswered. The once radiant hope that England and Spain might unite under one faith faded like candle smoke in the sea wind. Mary's subjects rejoiced quietly at Philip's absence. Even her counselors began to turn their loyalty elsewhere, toward her half-sister Elizabeth, whose Protestant charm grew brighter with every failure of Mary's reign. But in this morning scene, this moment of parting, none of that is yet visible. The Queen still believes love can sanctify suffering. She stands beneath the cold light of London, her crown glinting faintly in the fog, her figure small against the enormity of power. To the historian's eye, she is both tragic and formidable, the embodiment of a monarch at war with her own heart. To the believer's ear, she is a woman whose faith has become indistinguishable from longing. She does not weep. The Tudor blood forbids it. But as the palace doors close and the echo of her husband's footsteps vanish into the mist, something inside her, something fierce, something faithful, finally breaks. From this moment onward, Mary will rule alone. Her body has failed her. Her people fear her. And now, even love has left her. The bells of Westminster ring faintly through the fog. Not a celebration, but a requiem. A requiem for a queen who tried to love her God, her husband, and her country all at once, and lost them all in the same breath. London, February 1554. The city that once crowned her queen now trembles at her name. Smoke coils through the narrow streets, thick with fear and rumor. The sound of rebellion rises, not from foreign invaders, but from Englishmen themselves. It is called Wyatt's Rebellion, a movement born of mistrust, kindled by faith, and fueled by the ancient fear of foreign rule. For too many, Queen Mary is no longer England's daughter. She is the wife of Spain, and in their eyes, the crown she wears gleams not with divine right, but with foreign gold. The rebels cry for freedom, though none can yet define it. They march toward London carrying the banners of defiance, their boots pounding the frozen mud like drums of judgment. To them, Mary's marriage to Philip of Spain is a betrayal, the handing of England's soul into the hands of another empire. To her, their uprising is her crucifixion. The palace walls shake with the noise of approaching chaos. Advisors urge her to flee, to retreat to Windsor, to save herself. But Mary Tudor was not raised to run. Her entire life has been a rebellion against exile, against humiliation, against the shadow of her father's sin. And now, as fire and fury consume her city, she does what no one expects. She walks out to face them. The balcony doors open. A cold wind sweeps through the royal chambers, scattering papers, extinguishing candles. Below, thousands gather, soldiers, citizens, traitors. Smoke from the burning houses coils upward, turning the morning sky the color of blood. The Queen steps forward. Her dress is dark, her face pale, her hand gripping a crucifix that gleams in the dim light. For a moment, the noise falters. Every eye lifts to her, and in that stillness, she speaks. "I am your queen," she cries, her voice echoing over the crowd. "The daughter of Henry, not of Spain. If I must die, I die among my people." The words fall like thunder. This is not the voice of a tyrant, nor the voice of a supplicant. It is the voice of a woman who has been denied love, denied legacy, and now refuses to be denied her dignity. A hush sweeps across the streets. Men lower their weapons. The smoke drifts sideways, as if even the wind itself hesitates to breathe. And then, slowly, almost reverently, the first knee bends, then another, and another, until the crowd which moments ago had sworn to overthrow her, kneels before her in silence. In that instant, rebellion dies, not by sword or by flame, but by the sheer force of a queen's will. She won that day, but victory could not silence the whispers, for even as the mob disperses, even as the danger passes, the chant begins, faint at first, then growing with the wind. Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary, it rolls through the alleys, slips through the windows, echoes through the centuries. Not spoken in her presence, not yet, but whispered behind doors, written in diaries, etched into history itself. She had saved her throne, but lost her image. The courage that had stilled rebellion became the cruelty of legend. And from that day forward, every act of devotion, every execution, every pyre would feed the myth of the blood-soaked queen. To the historian, this is the paradox of Mary Tudor, a woman of immense conviction, yet trapped within the brutal machinery of her own faith. Her defiance in that moment was not madness, it was majesty. Few monarchs, man or woman, have ever faced down an armed rebellion with only a cross in hand and courage in their voice. But courage cannot outlast perception, and perception, once poisoned, never heals. England would remember her bravery only through the lens of her fire. Her words would be forgotten, but her name, Bloody Mary, would live on, immortal not in triumph, but in terror. As the sun sets that day, the Queen returns to her chambers. The crucifix still trembles in her grasp. Her lips move in silent prayer, not of gratitude, but of exhaustion. Outside, London smolders, wounded but alive, and somewhere in the distance, a bell tolls, slow, uncertain, like the heartbeat of a kingdom unsure whether it has just been saved or condemned. Mary stands alone at her window, staring into the smoke that drifts above her city. She has faced rebellion and lived, but within her, another rebellion brews, one that no victory can quell. The rebellion of faith against doubt, of duty against desire, of God's will against her own heart. That day she proved she was her father's daughter, but the world remembered only the blood. Dawn, November 1558. The last light of the Tudor candle flickers in the royal chapel of St. James's Palace. Outside, London lies silent beneath a veil of mist. The streets that once trembled at her command now sleep, unaware that the voice which ruled them for 5 years is fading into eternity. Within the dim chamber, the Queen lies still, pale, diminished, and alone. Mary Tudor, once the most powerful woman in Christendom, now breathes in shallow fragments. The air smells of wax, of incense, and of endings. On the bedside table stands a half-burnt candle and a small portrait of Philip of Spain, the man who was her husband, her savior, and her sorrow. The flame quivers, as if unwilling to outlive her. For days she has spoken little. Her courtiers whisper that she no longer recognizes the world around her, that she sees only visions. Her mother, Catherine of Aragon, smiling through the veil of death. Her father, Henry VIII, watching in silence. The faces of those who burned for their faith, each one an ember in her conscience. Her hand trembles as she reaches for her rosary. The beads slide through her fingers like moments she can no longer hold. And with the last of her breath, she whispers, "Tell my sister, I forgive her. Tell God, I tried 2 sentences, the measure of a life spent between conviction and failure. Forgiveness for Elizabeth, the half-sister she once imprisoned, now destined to inherit her crown. An apology to a God she served with fire, believing every act of cruelty was an act of faith." Outside, the first light of dawn creeps through the chapel doors. It spills across the cold stone floor, reaching her bedside like the slow hand of absolution. The Queen exhales one final time, and the candle dies. And so she passed, the Queen who burned her people to save their souls. History records her death without spectacle. No rebellion, no mourning crowd, only silence. The silence that follows exhaustion, not peace. Yet even in death, Mary Tudor's story refuses to fade. For she leaves behind a kingdom divided, a land scarred by fire and faith, where the smoke of her pyres still drifts across a conscience and memory. In the weeks that follow, bells toll in every parish, not for triumph, but for transition. England will rise again, but in a new light, one that Mary herself could never have endured. Elizabeth ascends the throne, young, radiant, Protestant, and with her, a new age dawns, an age of poetry, empire, and myth. The Elizabethan sun rises precisely where Mary's candle burned out. To the world, it seems a victory of light over darkness. To history, it is simply inheritance. The eternal rhythm of faith replaced by reason, flame replaced by dawn. England rose again in sunlight, but her name stayed in the smoke. The chroniclers would call her Bloody Mary, a title she never heard in life, yet one she would bear forever. To them, she was the Queen of Fire. To her, she was the Queen of Salvation. Between those two visions lies the tragedy of her reign and the paradox of her faith. The camera rises above the still body, through the chapel's open doors, over London's sleeping rooftops wrapped in fog. The river glints faintly beneath the first rays of day, and from above the city looks peaceful, as if unaware of the centuries of memory still to come. Mary Tudor died believing she had saved her people. History remembers her for the ones she could not. In the quiet between night and dawn, the Queen's last prayer becomes England's new beginning.